What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. But I'm not Dr. Vibe showing tonight. I'm Men and Masculinity, Eminem Explores tonight with a gentleman that is in a lot of demand. I keep on hearing this name all over the place, and we had a conversation about a month ago, and I said, you know what? I'm jacked. I'm jacked to have this man share with us tonight, James O'Rourke, and we got more people on. People are jumping all over the place tonight. O'Rourke, what is this spell you got on people? Hey, what is this? What is I see?
There's so many O'Rourkes in this space, in the men and masculinity space, that they get it confused. They think they're all me. So I've actually got like 5 versions of me out there. Got uncles and fathers and everybody, cousins, that are in the space. So
all right. Well, no, you know what? We're going to have an outstanding conversation tonight. Men and anyone. There's a whole bunch of people piling from all over the place. And tonight, Mr. O'Rourke has given some of his time to talk about the value of men's teams. And I've been told he's very well versed to speak about this. But before we get going, James, can you give a little background about yourself?
Sure. I've been involved in the men's work for over 20 years. As I said, I've had a lot of family members that have done the men's work, have been involved in men's teams, have done different types of trainings. I've given a lot of trainings together with different organizations. I started a men's organization back in the day, 20-something years ago, that grew to about 500 men. That organization then combined with another men's organization. I think we got up to about 800-900 men.
Wow.
We had men's teams across the different parts of the U.S., mainly East Coast, Canada. I've been involved in all different sides of the men's work, the community service side, the training side, men's teams, higher purpose work. So
you've done it all.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I just want to, welcome to everyone who's watching this live or on replay. But if you're watching it live, if you want to come into the conversation via webcam, you definitely have to jump in and get vocal. We also have this streaming live on Facebook, on the Men and Masculinity channel, and also on YouTube, on the Men and Masculinity channel on YouTube. So if you have comments or questions on those platforms, certainly make them there. Either myself or one of the Lee Rosen, the lead of the Men and Masculinity team, will be bringing them up and making sure they get addressed. So, James, I want to know, how did you get started in men's work, and why did you get started in men's work?
I think I got started before I even knew I got started.
Okay.
My father got men's work back in the early. His marriage wasn't, and his business partner came to a men's team. I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
I am not.
All right, I'll keep going. So, my father got involved in the men's work, and I wanted nothing to do with it. Yet, while I was away at college, I had joined a fraternity. I had a lot of men in my life. I got involved in student government, kept finding myself in places of leadership. And after graduating from college, I went around the world. I decided to go see Greece and Italy and Africa and Korea and Japan and China. And I did a lot of that traveling with some of the men that I had gone to college with, some of my fraternity brothers, and I was blown away by the different values and definitions of masculinity in different parts of the world. I went on to do my master's in Japan. I lived there for a while. I got very engaged in that culture, which is very different than the North American culture. And when I came back, and I started working in Manhattan, it was a very different environment than around the world. And I felt like I was missing something. I was having a lot of success in my life, but I wasn't happy. And I didn't know what it was about. My father had been telling me for several years, get on a men's team, check out some of these trainings. And I have to say there was some animosity there from my mother and him there from their divorce. So the last thing I wanted to do was be on a men's team. I had no interest in any way making him right. And it was my uncle, who was a Vietnam vet, who was very, very shut down, angry at the world. He was in a marriage. He had adopted a child, him and his wife, and he went and started getting engaged in men's teams and the men's work, and I saw this radical shift. And his relationship with his son changed, and he inspired me to say, wow, if this man can make this much of a shift, I should go check it out. So that's what I did, with no intention of doing anything other than checking it out. And 21 years later, here I am.
Well, there that's quite the story. I'd like to welcome Michelle, who's watching online here, and it seems a whole gang at Richmond's Place in Toronto. Woo! And I like it. Hey, good stuff, guys. So, Jake, take us back to the early days of you being involved in men's work. What were they like? Because obviously you had reference from some relatives, but how were those early days? Because you said you had no intention, and then you were in there. What were the early days like?
The early days of the men's work, I feel, were more militant, very structured. There was a lot of seemed like there was a lot of rules and regulations and standard in place, and it was almost like a revolving door on men's teams. You'd have to be a stud to stick around. And back in those days, we had something called the 3-foot rule. So if you got within 3 feet of another man, when you were telling him whatever you saw or whatever truth you thought was there, you had to watch out, because if you got within 3 feet, he just might deck you.
Wow.
First major event I went to, there were several hundred men there, and yeah, I saw some of that, and that was something that was a part of masculinity that I was not comfortable with. So, and it has changed radically over the years, but it was pretty hardcore back then.
So, James, what kept you engaged in those days, those early days? Because it seemed that some aspects of it were maybe not to your liking. What kept you engaged?
I think a couple things kept me engaged. One was there was always a higher purpose part to the work. So even at that event where there were 200 men and, that 3-foot rule was in effect, we were putting a new roof on a Boy Scout camp. We put an entire new roof on their main lodge in 2 days, several hundred men. And women showed up to support us. There was things like that. There were events where we were, supporting Habitat for Humanity. There were lots of, there was something called, there were some projects at schools where we were replacing the outdoor swing sets and jungle gyms. So that part always kept me engaged, and seeing the community kept me engaged. And truth be told, that I learned so much from other men on men's teams and what they were going through in their lives and what wasn't working, and when they fell down, and supporting them to get back up. I was 26 when I got involved, or 25, almost 26 when I got involved, and I learned more just being on teams than any training I've ever done.
Wow. Wow. Okay. And when did you realize it was time to make more of a commitment? Because you've done so many things. Was there a moment saying, you know what, I've got to do more than what I'm doing?
There were several men that were in the circles, the teams. Uh, the teams would get together to get inspected and to see how they were performing. Another team or multiple teams would get together from time to time during the year and ask questions and see if there were, if teams were really fulfilling on their purpose, what they stated they were about. And there were several men that kept showing up that were very powerful. And I remember looking at them at the time and saying, wow, I'm never going to be at that level of that man. One was a paratrooper, former World War II paratrooper. There were several other men that were self-made men, I guess you call it, that I looked at and said, wow, how did he get from being a drug addict to, being a world-class trainer, consultant, and stuff? So I would ask them, and they would tell me, hey, you've got to climb the ladder. Keep stepping up, keep taking on bigger things, bigger projects. And that's what I did. I said, well, if that's the ladder they were able to climb, then let me take it a rung at a time. And I kept finding myself in other leadership positions. And I guess similar to, like you'd say in any 12-step program, you take it a day at a time.
Nice. I just want to say to anyone, especially, ask if you have questions of James, please don't please feel free to ask. You can sit and watch, or you can get engaged. Like, I'm looking at a room of at least 4 men right now, and I know they must have at least one question to ask, but they can either type it in, or you can come in. They're already in a room, but you just take yourselves off mute, or if you want to grab a spot on the Get Vocal platform, that's great too. And we're also monitoring Facebook. For some reason, our YouTube channel is having a little challenge. I'm trying to work that out. James, what was your family's thoughts when you got initially involved in the men's movement? Because that could be a deterrent for some men to get involved.
Definitely. The men in my family who had been involved were obviously very excited. My sisters were not. They blamed as I told you, my father had gotten involved I think from my perspective, it was to try and save his marriage. I think for his, it was to get educated as to, what he didn't know, he didn't know. But my sisters blamed their divorce on men's teams. They saw a difference in my father, and they chose to use that as an excuse. So when I became involved, they were not happy at all. It was, they confronted me. To tell you the truth, they confronted me. They questioned me, and really what I asked was for them to trust and respect that I knew what I needed and what was good for me. And so despite whatever stuff they found on the internet or they referenced against men's teams, in the end, they wound up backing off. But it was years before they would before they stopped digging, I guess you could say.
All right. How are men's teams different today than when you started your involvement with men's teams? Or are they different?
They are different. They are very different. So I would say that the main difference is that back in the day, there were a lot of men on men's teams, and yet there was very little leadership. It seemed like the mid '80s was the beginning of all that, and so there wasn't a solid leadership to follow. A lot of men on men's teams were looking to change men, fix men, have them fit their mold of what they thought a man should be. And that's why I think those meetings became so confrontational at times. Today, it's much more about genuine care, compassion, honesty, intimacy, respecting the other person, finding out who the man is that they want to be, what is their definition of masculinity. It's really evolved significantly from what I first experienced.
I'm gonna parking lot that term masculinity in men's teams. I'm sure I'll make sure we get to address it before we finish up tonight. But we do have a question from James from the Game Changers in Connecticut. His question is, for men's teams that operate very highly, what are some of the key attributes of those high functioning teams?
Good question. So I think one of the main things is that they have a solid, I'll call it a purpose, a mission, even a game that they're playing. It's something that can be achieved. It might take a year, it might take 10 years, but there's a solid, like I said, mission, purpose, game they're playing together. The other thing is that they get to know their men, and they know what their values are, their core values, not their aspirational values, but really their core values. And they point out to the men on their teams when those values when they see them not being held. And they ask permission for how to, assist that man and do it in, maintaining or keeping his values. I think, men's teams that have those solid purposes or missions, they will, there's clarity there, because when there is clarity, they'll enact or install high standards and accountability on the team. The other thing I would say is that men's teams that are high functioning, they have fun. They're a place where men look forward to going. They find things to do. One of the highest functioning men's teams I met early on wound up climbing 5 of the toppest peaks in the world, and they did that because it was a stretch. It forced each of those men to have success in different areas of their lives where they were struggling, whether it was in their physical health or raising the money and becoming more successful to be able to do that.
Okay.
Those are some of the main ones.
From what you just shared, then I'm gathering, and correct me if I'm wrong, that process and structure are part of a successful men's team.
Yeah, I think every successful men's team develops a culture and standards based on the common mission or purpose that they've chosen. There's a reason they're together, right? I mean, now if the purpose of the team is just to have fun, then you don't need a lot of structure or process or as high standards as if your men's team is together to help men achieve a certain level of success in their lives that they have identified, or to as we say, be the man you always wanted to be, or be the man you truly want to be.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. Again, just want to reach out to people. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them on the Get Vocal platform or on the Men of Masculinity Facebook page. We're streaming live on both those platforms. I guess we can only go from your own experience now, but over the years, have you seen the demographics of men's teams change at all, or has it been somewhat the same? And what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot in the time that in the last 20 years. When I first got engaged with men's teams, primarily in New York City, New Jersey area, you know, men's teams were mostly white males. You know, it differed by area. At one point, I was on a meeting in Manhattan with men's teams where most of the men were Jewish. It's changed over time. It's definitely gotten much more diverse. There's a lot more diversity and inclusion there. I'd say that today it's pretty representative of the overall population demographics, at least where I live in my area, or what I've seen on the East Coast.
Nice. I got some comments here from Facebook. MJ Durkin says the team itself should decide what its purpose.
Absolutely.
And then also a question from Steve Richmond in Toronto. James, what does the future hold for men's teams? The benefits to being on a men's team are great, yet so few men know about them. What will make men's work even more impactful for more men? We could spend the whole hour on that.
I have to say, one of the things that I think with the next generation coming on, men that are now in their 20s and 30s, is online men's teams. Men today are much more comfortable with this type of platform, or they're good at finding others that have common values, common likes. So I think the future is really in developing places where men can put together online men's teams.
During your journey and work with men's teams over the years, have the challenge that men are bringing to the men's team, are they the same? Okay, hold on just a second. Michelle, you're going to have to put yourself on mute. It's really noisy there. Thank you. So just getting back to that. So James, are the challenges or the discussion points in men's teams, have they changed over your journey and involvement with men's teams?
In some ways they have. I mean, I still see a lot of the same questions brought up at trainings on men's teams. Men that are single, who are struggling with relationships, not sure if they want to get married, not sure what it means to be married. They don't want the type of marriage a lot of times that they saw with their parents. Men that are married, struggling with how to have a more successful marriage, how to be a better husband and father. So those things have stayed the same. There are lots of new things I've seen coming with the younger generations as to a real struggle with defining their masculinity. It's a different world today than when we grew up. My grandfather would sit on the stoop in the Bronx, and he had his men on his street, and they were their own little men's team. They were together till the end. That doesn't really exist today for men. Most people don't know their neighbors. So we see a lot of younger men come in really struggling with defining their masculinity and what that means to them. There's a lot of values put out by society and they're much more open to trying those values on. And yet there's a lot of confusion that comes up in that process.
Okay. We've got a friend of the M&M Masculinity platform, M&M Explorers, with us. Tom Mack. I guess you know this guy named James O'Rourke once in a while.
Never heard of him.
Okay, well, pleasure for you to. I'm the connecting point today. Okay, what is your question and or comment for Mr. O'Rourke?
Well, I just want a friendly reminder: the 3-foot rule still exists.
It's not used much anymore, though. Yeah.
No, because you know what? I think men are learning through men's teams, and that when you do put your ego in your back pocket at the team meetings, men can approach you physically, emotionally, and give you what you need or what you want. But back in the day, I was there with James. It was brutal, and it was just a matter of time before it imploded. And James started what was it, Plasma, right?
Plasma, yep.
Well, you had about 60 men, and we were looking for a place to go. We came from the same weekend, so we joined up and we came up with a vision. And all of a sudden, context started to become the word of the day. Like, if you come from a good place of context, change will come. So Jim got to take it to a certain level, and then another man, and then I followed in his footsteps as the leader of what James is now, and it grew and grew and grew. And my context was always finding the greatness in men, and and before that it was like, let's drill him down and see if he gets back up. It's like, it just doesn't go like that. So not many comments. I just wanted to pop on and say hi to my man.
Thanks.
Good.
The way it evolves, the way it all evolves. For me, I went from a man who was very competitive and envious, and I had a chip on my shoulder, and it took a lot of years to really evolve. Change doesn't come overnight, and right. By the time I got to my leadership position, and to this day, I really root for men's success and their families. So, and me and Mr. O'Rourke have spent many sleepless nights, many sleepless nights owning the success or failures of what we're doing with men's teams and men's divisions and things like that. So.
Well, Tom, I'm going to let you go because I know someone else wants to get in the room.
Yep, I just want to say, hey, bro.
Thank you so much for sharing, as always. You take care.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay, seat is opened up here on the Get Vocal platform. Another question from MJ Durkin asking, what should a team do when a man is consistently violating the standards of the team?
Good question. So there's really only one question in my book, and that is to review what the purpose of that team is, and hence, the standards that need to be in place. If a man is continuously failing at that, the way I describe it is, if he's decided to play tennis and you're playing football, you need to make that real clear. Like, hey, here's the game we're playing. Do you want to play this game? And if they do, then they get an opportunity to decide to play football together. If they keep playing tennis, then they should go find a team that plays tennis, because there's plenty of those too. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. There we go. Question, I guess, comments here, and thank you to Lee Rosen for. We have another person on here. Steve. No. Hello, Steve. How are you? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, he'll come back. From Facebook, Sal AQ. Great purpose, finding the greatness in men. You must be an incredible leader. That inspires me. Very nice. Very, very nice. How how are the younger men of a team, like when you get your men's teams going? How are they different, and how have you and other leaders adapted to the difference in young men today compared to when you started?
It's a great question. So when I started, all men were treated the same. You know, everybody was expected to toe the same line, and you know, as Tom Mack said, we wanted to find the greatness in every man, and to give them the training they needed to have success in their lives. But we gave it to every man the same way. And I think today, the way that's changed with the younger men is recognizing that there's men mature. You know, we never talk about the immature masculine. We hear a lot in today's society about the toxic masculinity. But we don't talk about the fact that men are immature. And a lot of the work I did in those early years as a 26-year-old, 27, 28, going on up, was realizing how immature I was, and making mistakes and falling on my face and learning from the men above me. You know, some of those men like that World War II paratrooper, you know, who kicked my ass, you know, and in a good way. But so what we learned over the years was to not treat a single 25-year-old like a married 40-year-old, and to allow them to go out and have fun and make mistakes and have the sounding board there to learn from, and you know, really give them that space to enjoy the learning curve. It's a different process when you've got men around you with a lot of life experience. You know, it's very easy, and I see this with a lot of the younger men today, is they take things so personally. I think part of that's because of the social media out there. There's so much more information available today that men can take in, and they think because they took in the knowledge, they read it, they actually understand it and can implement it. And so when they fail, there's a lot more stress and anxiety. So the value of a men's team in that process of allowing a man to go through the learning curve, and to mature with other men on a men's team is really valuable. Like I said in the beginning, I learned more just going through the process with men on the teams I was on through the years. I would not have the marriage I have today. I would not be the father I am today. I have 4 children, great children. I definitely would have married somebody very different, because I wasn't clear on my values and what was important to me. And I learned a lot of that because men gave me the space to learn.
That's really good. Just want to welcome a bunch of people that have jumped on here. Greetings to Badges, greetings to Nash, greetings to D Brick, greetings to Muncaster. I believe that's Robert Muncaster, I believe. Greetings to Cliff. That's all on the Get Vocal platform. I'm just going to jump over to Facebook to see Sal AQ is watching. Ian Sherman. He says, "Love you, O'Rourke." Ian Sherman.
I love you, too.
There you go. And we got more questions piling in, so let's get to them.
Sure.
Steve Richmond is saying, how do you instill commitment to this work in men?
Honestly, I don't think you should try to instill anything in a man. Given the opportunity to see how rich the work is, men will naturally gravitate to what speaks to their values. And there's so much in the men's work now, on the community, like I said, on the community service side, on the training side, and the men's team side. There's a lot that can speak to a man's values. And if he finds something that speaks to his values, you know, he'll love it and get involved in it. There are some men that come and experience a men's team and say, that's not for me. That's fine. And I've had some men who come back 20 years later and say, wow, this is what I need now. Yeah.
In due time. Another conversation piece here from Ian Sherman. He's asking, what do you do when a team starts turning into a support group for men? And I think it's very important running a men's team. And what's the difference between a men's team that you're talking about and a support group?
Yeah, so it goes back to those core values again. A men's team has a purpose, and in order to achieve that purpose or that mission, you have to find out the core values of your men, not their aspirational values, not their accidental values, but really what their core values are. And in that process of achieving whatever you want to achieve as a team, it puts the ownership, the responsibility, the duty, the obligation on the man to bring out when somebody else is not on their game, just like you would if you had a player on the field on a soccer game or a football game or whatever. You'd let them know if they were not on their game. A support group to me is men that get together to talk about what they would like. And a lot of times, what that leads to is men telling them they're right about failing. And that usually doesn't really support men in a way. Now, I think there's a time and a place where men need support groups, significant things go on in their lives and things they need to deal with and get out, and support group can be great for that, but it's very different than a men's team, which is a purpose, mission-driven team that has very clear values and standards.
So it leads me to ask this conversation. Oh, I think someone's coming on to ask a question before the person jumps in here. When should a man start looking to getting involved in a men's team? Is there any core things that a man should be feeling or looking for?
A couple of things. Come up for me around that. One is if you have another man in your life who says, hey, you get a lot of value out of the men's team, and he tells you something that is true about you, true about the value you get, then listen to him and check it out. The second thing is if you're asking yourself the question of why aren't I having the success that I believe I should have right now? If you're looking at life and saying, hey, I think I've got the tools, but I'm not having the success that would equate to having those tools, then you should check out a men's team.
Okay. Well, Steve is in with his New Orleans hat, and looking forward to hearing a great question. So welcome, Steve. Thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, this is Steve's account, but this is Holzer and a bunch of other men in Connecticut. O'Rourke, good to see you again. Question for you is, given that you've got all these years of experience, what are some of the coolest, kind of most impactful, greatest activities that you've witnessed men's teams do, whether it's service, fun, or really anything?
Well,
thanks.
Yeah. I've seen amazing things come out of men's teams. I've seen the men in Connecticut, support hurricane relief on Puerto Rico and help to rebuild cities and churches and things like that. I've seen men's team build houses, working with Habitat for Humanity. I saw men's teams, the blackout in New York. I don't remember what year that was. The 90s maybe. I saw men's teams out in the street helping locally. I've seen men's teams take over community centers, YMCAs that were closed and needed a lot of fixing up. I've seen men's teams raise the money to even buy community centers in a town, in a downtrodden area, and rebuild it and open it back up. And all kinds of
Okay, hopefully James is only for
years. Most of it,
I'm actually going to ask Steve, and he's still on here. Two-part conversation piece, Steve. A, how did you know it was time for you to get involved in a men's group, and how did that happen? And it's the third part. What's one of the coolest things you've experienced being in a men's group? You're on mute. Oh, he's still on mute.
No, I got you. That's a great question. Yeah, I didn't know I needed the men's work until I got into it, until I went to a men's weekend and realized, holy shit, I was not prepared to be married. I have no idea, how to even identify my own definition of masculinity, and why don't I have men in my life to help answer any of these questions? So, I got into it through a friend who just said, you're a good dude. I'd love to connect on a deeper level. If you trust me, go to this weekend and then let's talk about it. And I'm a pretty open-minded individual, and I had $600. So that's all it took for me. Some of the coolest things that, I've seen. I mean, we haven't rebuilt houses or done any of that cool stuff, here in Connecticut, but I've seen people raise, pretty intense amounts of cash on other teams towards really good causes. I've seen, charity concerts get put together, even just the small stuff in local communities like, code drives. I mean, from a community service level, I think all that stuff is incredibly impactful. And I actually think that that's the kind of stuff that if it was done more publicly, more men would see it and want to join in the work. You mentioned that, O'Rourke, of like having men witness the community service aspect, or you yourself witnessing it early on and getting really engaged and intrigued by the community service work, I think is something more teams should take on personally. So I don't know, any other things that my team here wants to share? Any cool things that we want to, anything you've seen? No?
It's interesting as Lee is jumping on in just a second here. Now he's on. It makes me want to ask, and you mentioned community service aspect maybe missing. Between James, Steve, and Lee, are there any things missing on men's teams that you've noticed at the level that you're at? Are there things that they're missing right now that they're not filling the void in?
We're terrible at having fun.
Yeah, having fun is something that we're all really bad at. Yeah. There's not much curly in our men's teams up here in Connecticut that we've seen. So
that's been common for the last 21 years. So
why has that been a consistent void? What's going on? Like, why isn't it more fun? Why do you feel it's not more fun?
Me, man, so serious.
I can answer that. I think he's right. That was Tucker I heard in the background. That's my old men's team right over here is my old men's team. Okay. But I think we take it seriously. Like I know I did for a long time. My first 8 years in the men's work was very serious. We got work to do. We had a mission, whatever team I was on, and it was a weird kind of dynamic. Let's not fuck around. We got work to do, and that's not useful in the long term. Like that comes at a cost, from my experience.
Yeah, I just add to that most men are, we're very solution oriented, right? So we want to go out and solve stuff and make a difference right now, and we don't, I'm generalizing here, but I would say every men's team could be a lot more fun and a lot more powerful if they acknowledge the wins and celebrate the wins. Even if you think it's a small win, men today, we need to celebrate our wins. Yep. We really do.
I fully agree on that. I think one thing we have to do as men is it doesn't matter how big or small they are, celebrate them.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we're looking for the big wins, but those big wins wouldn't happen if there were small wins along the way.
Great point.
Yeah, and as a father, that's something that I want to teach my children. And so the better I get at doing that, the better I am at being a father, because that's what kids need too.
Lee or Steve, you can keep on. I have stuff I can share, but I
Well, I got a question.
Go ahead.
Hey, Jim. Hey, thanks for being on. First off, I just want to give you credit. Like, all this started from a conversation you had with me after I stepped down from a position, and I was like in a place on where I wanted to rest, and you planted a little seed, and from that seed, this thing grew out of it. So I just want to acknowledge you that this has your name on it. Number one. And a question for you is like men's teams that I've been on seem to go in cycles. Like there goes to a cycle where there's a lot of high energy and a lot of rah-rahness, and then there's a cycle of where it kind of cools and standards drop a little bit. What have you seen work in your experience that keeps a consistency around the team rather than a roller coaster?
So I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but the first thing that comes to mind is purpose-driven versus leadership-dependent, right? When teams start out, they tend to be very purpose-driven. After a while, men get comfortable with the new purpose and that they're making some progress or having some success, and they become more. A lot of teams become more leadership-dependent. Maybe I don't know if that's because they tend to believe in their leadership more, or why, but it often winds up creating some backdoors that take them off purpose, right? You got to remember that men's teams are voluntary, and these are people giving their time freely. And unfortunately, most men's teams I see, they have this expectation of their leadership that this is a 24/7 job, and really, the majority of the work on a men's team happens the 6 days, and 21 hours when they're not meeting. So, staying on purpose and not making it about the leadership is a key thing. The other thing that I've noticed with teams like that you're talking about is that they become so process-driven and there needs to be process and standards, right? But they become so process-driven that they forget about one of my favorite concepts, which is evidence-based. Show me the evidence, right? Just because you're doing the process doesn't mean that you're going to get to the goal line. So I love it when men's teams take on evidence-based. Show up every week with a win. Show up something we can celebrate. Give us some evidence that you're moving down that path, and let's show some evidence that the team is moving forward. Whether it's monthly or quarterly or whatever it is. So those two things.
Okay. Got a question here from Michelle, who's come in and out on the platform on Get Vocal. She says, as a woman, what can women do or say to help bring men to explore what teams have to offer?
Great question.
I'm glad you're answering it.
As men, we love to get the approval of women. So, a woman just saying, hey, I think, you should check out a men's team. That alone can have men want to check it out. You might need to say it more than once, but that will definitely, men's egos and our desire to be liked and all those things, especially from women, I can't even tell you how many men have come to men's teams just because a woman told them they should check it out. And sometimes it's their ego saying, "What? I don't need that," but I'll go check it out. I'll show her. I'll do it. And other times it's just the fact that men really want the acknowledgement and approval and to be liked. Just say it.
Okay. Two more comments here from the Facebook page. MJ Durkin, men need to build up, not torn down. He also says, focus on our strengths and what we are doing right. What you focus on expands.
Absolutely.
Great. Steve, I know you're on mute. Anything you want to add? Yeah, just a handsome looking guy.
That's me. Yeah. I'm actually, I keep forgetting I'm logged in as Steve Ash, but I'm Paul. Yeah. Tucker, come on in here.
He's not the only handsome guy here.
Ah, there we go. And I got the shine. Not a boy.
I put my clothes. Not that close.
Rosen, get back in here.
You got a ways to go. I have another conversation piece. In the current climate of masculinity, how has that affected men's teams?
The current climate of masculinity, I feel like masculinity is more under fire today than it was, 21 years ago.
Why do you say that?
When I started it, well, I say that because of the whole conversation of toxic masculinity today. I look at the school systems, which are no longer giving even boys the space or the activity they need to succeed. There's 20 years ago, macho was macho, and it was, some people liked it and some people didn't. Today it's toxic masculinity. I mean, and for most of the 21 years I've been around, unfortunately, and this is why I love the Men and Masculinity Summit, is that we've allowed the feminist movement to define the topics that we talk about. And for the first time, we have an organization and a space for men to talk about the topics that we believe need to be talked about. So,
gentlemen, what do you have to say about that? How has in any way the current state of masculinity had effect on your men's team? Is it a constant conversation topic? What's being said about it, and how's it being handled and discussed?
I mean, from my point of view, speaking as Steve Ash,
notice I didn't say the name before.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
I learned my lesson.
Yeah, I think we're too busy just trying to do the work and support each other here locally to really think about kind of what feminism or the national kind of move to kind of put more attention on toxic masculinity is having on us. That's kind of my sense, but I am really interested in trying to codify what it is that we as one men's team and what many men's teams potentially are doing to better define masculinity in the 21st century, right? Because I think we're doing a lot of work on that without labeling it, without codifying it. And I think that's great, and I think it's super positive for the community.
Any comments from your cohort beside you?
No, I mean, it's just that this overarching theme for me is that masculinity is important. I think for every man to see themselves is just as important. But what comes up for me is that I think where our team has experienced success is the relationships that we've built that have been established around trust and letting each man define what their own journey is, and then helping them to stay accountable based off of that trust and relationship to achieve whatever they want to achieve. So masculinity is important, don't get me wrong, but I think for this men's team here, it's been more about how each man defines who they want to be and how they're going to operate, and the other men to, have a trusting relationship that they've built with each of us to be able to achieve what they want to be for themselves.
Nice. And James, you brought up to me a future conversation topic about masculinity and education. I think that's a very, very, very big conversation piece. And, like it or not, especially in our public ed, like from K to 6, the majority of educators are women. I'll just leave it at that.
Yep.
And that's a whole other conversation there. We're going to start winding it down because an hour goes by real fast. And I know James has got a lot of things on the go. Any final words you have for us, James, in regards to, men's teams?
One of the topics we talked about earlier around leadership of men's teams, I just want to make sure it's not misconstrued, is, I said men will naturally gravitate to teams that have a common purpose, right? But within the men's team, a lot of times what you see is leaders will put themselves with other men that have similar skill sets. And I think one of the values that men don't take into account is the opportunity to work with other men on a team that have totally different skill sets. As a matter of fact, if you're leading a men's team, you should be looking for a man that's got strengths where you have weaknesses. That should be the man to be your second or to support you. Look for areas that complement. We've done trainings with just men, and we've done trainings with men and women where, we pair men and women up together, and they get to learn by working together with somebody different. And sometimes that helps them in their relationship. But, there's a lot of value for, two men in leadership on a men's team to really learn and take on some qualities and attributes of the other man. And that's a great value on a men's team. So look at your men's team and see, if you're the captain or you're leading that team, is the man who's your second a man who's got strengths where you have weaknesses, and that'll make your team stronger.
And as we close here, what do you feel is the future for men's teams as we're chatting here on July 2nd, 2019?
Sorry, you cut out there.
No problem. I'm just saying, what in your opinion is the future of men's teams?
I think the future of men's teams is actually online men's teams. I think the future is going to be, men finding men that want to take on a common purpose, and those men will meet over the internet. Now, maybe over time they'll find enough men locally to be able to have local meetings, or maybe they'll just show up at the summit each year and have their face-to-face there, or maybe we'll get really good at having fun and they'll go meet in Disneyland, or climb Mount Kilimanjaro, or dive with the sharks in South Africa or something. But there's a whole new universe available out there now with social media that I think is going to be the future of men's teams.
Okay. Well, in closing, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to with us. And if people want to get in touch with you in any way, is there a way they can touch base with you?
So my organization, Potomo, has a public Facebook page, and we have a private page for men's teams. Men can contact me there. That's probably the best place.
Okay. Well, again, I'd like to say, there's Motomo Men. That's MOTOMOMEN.com. Thank you, Lee Rosen, for putting that in. I'd like to thank everyone Lee Rosen's on fire tonight. Here we go. Next M&M Summit tied to a high purpose project. Thanks to all from CT, from Connect. Thank you. No problem. Just want to say, and I'm going to just say, put you out. I'm going to set you down. There we go. I have to thank him. I'd like to thank everybody that was on. Deanna, HW, Nash, Michelle, another Steve, DeBrick, Muncaster, Cliff, Neil, Tom, Deb, Cliff. There were others that were on the call too. Just wanted to jump over to the Facebook side real quick before we close it off. MJ Durkin, Jim Rutherham. I know there were others, Mark Rosenblum, Sal AQ. Thank you so much for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule. For more information, go to the website www.menandmasculinity.com. For upcoming epic conversations, we'd like to say thank you so much for taking time to watch. And to the Americans that are watching this live, happy 4th of July. I'm in Toronto. We did our Victoria Day over the weekend. And James, before we went on live a few weeks ago, said he's going to come back. So get ready. James is going to come back for more. Thanks very much, James. Have a great evening.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.